Dave Lee Travis, Simon Bates, Bruno Brooks, Gary Davis. These were the most famous voices of a generation. Every week, 20 million listeners tuned in to their shows on Radio 1. But in the mid-1990s, two close friends were appointed to revamp Britain's favourite radio station. One was a polished and sharp-suited manager, driven by corporate ambition. The other, a maverick music producer with a massive record collection. This is the story of how these two men, in their efforts to make Radio 1 young again, mercilessly butchered the careers of Britain's top disc jockeys. And of how the flame-haired superstar they hoped would save the station became a ginger nail in the coffin of their 20-year friendship.
It's the happy, happy sound of Radio 1.
In 1967, Radio 1 started life as the voice of youth. 20 years on, it had become a national institution, a temple to pop music. And the DJs had become huge celebrities, bigger than the pop stars whose records they were playing.
You had about 24 million listeners a week in those days. You knew you were onto something big, but you didn't really think about it. I mean, everybody got on very well, I suppose, in a very small way like they do in Hollywood.
But behind the scenes, a young Radio 1 newsreader was less than impressed.
I was never a real fan of Radio 1, I have to say. It wasn't exactly the station of hip youth. It was the station your mum listened to.
And his friend and mentor, producing the station's most popular programme, was tearing his hair out with frustration.
I can remember vividly sitting on the top of my stairs at home on a Monday morning when I was due to go to work to produce the Dave Lee Travis show, and just bursting into tears and saying, I can't do this anymore, you know. There's got to be more to life than this, because it was a terrible, terrible job.
Matthew and Trevor left Radio 1 to seek a more natural home for their ambition and creativity, unaware that they would one day return to wreak a terrible revenge on the station they had grown to abhor. They went to work in BBC local radio, rising through the ranks and eventually running Greater London Radio in hugely successful partnership.
He's a music expert who understands programming music and has worked in music radio for most of his career and music television. And I'm a manager.
He liked drinking and he liked smoking. And at the time, you know, so did I. So we had quite a lot in common, really. So we were pretty close.
In just 2 years, they turned this ailing station into the award-winning home of the nation's most inventive new broadcasters. But while Trevor and Matthew collected accolades for modernising GLR, Radio 1 had remained anchored to its heritage.
It's just coming up to 12:45.
What should have been a flagship youth station was catering to ageing Gary Davis fans. And teenage listeners were being lured away to hip new commercial stations. Then, in 1993, the BBC decided it was time for a change. Just 10 years after he'd first set foot in Radio 1, Matthew strode triumphantly through the portals of its headquarters, Egton House. No longer a newsreader, but now the station's new controller. He was charged with making the station feel young again. Matthew was about to embark upon the most radical overhaul in the station's 25-year history. But he had reckoned without Radio 1's special culture.
I think Matthew was a bit optimistic about how easy it would be to persuade the staff of the necessity for change.
I didn't expect to be carried shoulder high around the building, but on the other hand, I was surprised when I got there to find how entrenched the culture was. I remember going into the typing pool where all the girls sat, who filled out the forms and ordered the records up from the library and so on, and somebody looking up and saying, "What the hell do you want?"
Entirely unaware, Matthew had stumbled into the sacred heart of Radio 1.
The typing pool! How dare he call it a bloody typing pool? I think that the Radio 1 girls run everything. The Radio 1 girls were a tribe of Amazons. They ran the whole lot. And to dismiss them as typists it's an obscenity. I hate him for that.
Matthew's first task was to clear the jungles of the nation's favourite station of the dinosaurs that had roamed the airwaves for so many years and replace them with new and younger voices.
There were a number of DJs who were older than the Prime Minister, the Director General of the BBC and the Archbishop of Canterbury. In fact, one of them was an old age pensioner. Now, I'm not ageist about people. You can have people of 70 broadcasting to young people, but if the whole cast of characters is somehow massively out of touch with youth culture, then you really have a problem.
Determined to show Britain's youth that Radio 1 was entering a brand new Matthew Bannister era, the new controller planned to turn the spotlight on his aging DJs one last time by sacking them.
You don't want to hurt people unnecessarily, but sometimes you do have to show that you have taken the decision.
But before he could get his hands on the axe, his first and biggest prey flew the nest. Dave Lee Travis announced live to 15 million listeners that he was quitting Radio 1.
Changes are being made here that go against my principles, and I just cannot agree with them. And I really want to put the record straight at this point, and I thought that you ought to know first.
Dave Lee Travis's departure had not gone entirely to plan. But Matthew was in confident mood. After all, there were plenty more dinosaurs left in Egton House. The big money was on Simon Bates being the next to go. But just as Matthew was about to execute his coup de grace, Simon Bates did a DLT on him.
I was called by the press office one morning to say that there was a story running on a news agency that Simon Bates was leaving Radio 1. So I popped into his studio where he was doing the Golden Hour and said, "Simon, there's this story you're leaving." Yes. I said, "Do you have anything to do with that?" Well, these things get out, don't they, And I said, well, as it happens, we didn't have a plan to renew your contract when it came up in 3 months' time. But I wish it hadn't been announced like this, and I wonder if you mind leaving the building through the side entrance.
But the wily Bates insisted on leaving through the front entrance. He now presented what should have been Matthew's first and most spectacular sacking as his own triumphant resignation. Now, determined not to let any more of his DJs get the better of him, Matthew plunged into his task with fearless zest. The cull could now begin in earnest. Within months, self-styled medallion man Gary Davis, Whispering Bob Harris, Alan Freeman, Jackie Brambles, and Johnny Walker had all been Bannistered.
They were just dismissed as if they were nothing, as if there was something on the bottom of your shoe. We just thought, who's next? And every day somebody was getting fired. It was very, very ugly.
And each time another dinosaur crashed under the axe of Matthew Bannister, the press became more and more interested in Radio 1.
We were in a sort of heaven mode where all this manna was falling down for us to write about all these big star DJs getting fired. There was a goldmine of stories here, and we're nevertheless sitting there thinking, oh my God, you know, it's like every week there's another DJ going. You start thinking, well, the guy that's making this decision of getting rid of these people is killing Radio 1. And that was, without doubt, across the board in Fleet Street, was the perception of, that Matthew Bannister was doing, that he was killing Radio 1.
As the dust settled and a new era dawned, one of the old guard was promised a central role in Matthew's schedule. Although no teenager, Steve Wright was regarded as a rare talent who would appeal to younger listeners.
Steve Wright had the biggest audience of any show on the network, and it's received wisdom, and it's right, that you should put your biggest star on at breakfast time. Breakfast time is the time when the biggest audiences come to radio. It's the most important show. It has a disproportionate effect on the performance of the whole station. It's the shop window for the whole station.
Matthew's plan was to use Steve Wright to attract millions of listeners in the mornings and then keep them hooked to the station with new talent. Joe Wiley, Lisa Ianson, Tim Westwood, and Matthew's big hope, Danny Baker.
My view is that Danny's one of the most creative radio broadcasters that exists in this country.
Baker was best known across the country for a set of commercials in which he knocked on people's doors armed with a packet of soap powder. But he had also been presenting a football chat show on Radio 5.
I got a call for the agent. What about Radio 1? What about Radio 1? Well, you can get, you know, the same amount of money you're getting, more than actually you get for doing a daily show, just for doing 2 hours on Saturdays and Sundays. What, oh? Well, show me the door. So I went to Radio 1.
On the 30th of October 1993, Danny Baker went on air for the first time. 15 million listeners expecting a DLT-hosted snooker quiz were shocked to find a loudmouth Cockney asking people to phone in with stories about how they got babies' rattles stuck to their heads. But more shocked than anyone were DLT himself, listening to the show from his Warwickshire ranch, and anarchic funster Adrian Just, whose programme was scheduled to follow the new Radio 1 megastar.
I remember Danny Baker's first show. I'd never been so depressed in my life. I was working in the studio, trying to get the show ready. I remember DLT phoning up about 10:30. I had a dreadful morning. I remember it well. It didn't get any better as the day went on. And he phoned up and he sounded heartbroken. He said, "Are you listening to this crap?" I said, "Dave," I said, "don't depress me." I said, "I've got to go in and try and do a fun show, try and pull it off the floor at 1 o'clock. And I did. I mean, how we did any comedy shows, I don't know, but we did. And we did some of the best shows ever. Touch wood, I say it myself.
Danny Baker broadcasting at 100 miles an hour, standing up with a Cockney accent and saying weird things and talking about P.G. Wodehouse and things like that. This is not simple broadcasting. But I thought that what the BBC should do is be able to support people who were inventive and surreal and different.
It was just a disaster. From the first minute, you knew it wasn't part of Radio 1 and not what Radio 1 was about. And all the years we'd worked, it was just destroyed it in 5 minutes.
Within weeks, Baker's audience was down to 7 million. But this was fine by the Daz man.
I'd come from an audience of 1.5 million to an audience of 7 or 8, even though that was down on the 15 that DLT had. I'd never been such a hit. I've got 7 million people.
But it wasn't just Danny Baker. Many of Matthew's signings were struggling to attract the new, younger audience he wanted. And the old listeners were abandoning Radio 1, choosing instead to follow DLT and Simon Bates to commercial stations.
Matthew had this phenomenal rise through the BBC. He was experiencing that fantastic golden boy thing, and it was beginning to go wrong. Now, that's a great test of your character.
I don't think it would be too incorrect to say that I think various stories were going out there, you know, Matthew Bannister still got a job at the BBC. Oh, they must be mad.
I think it was amazing how much support the BBC gave me, and in fact, I think that only the BBC could have done this, because in a commercial organisation, I'm sure I'd have been fired.
In In the spring of 1995, a beleaguered Matthew went to a country retreat to plan the next big strategic step for his station. Here, he decided that Radio 1 needed to appoint someone with his finger right on the pulse of what young people were listening to.
He certainly took the view that what we should do is make a search to see exhaustively who the best people out there were.
And to make sure he got the very best, headhunters were employed to trawl the world for the man who would make Radio 1 cool again.
I was sitting in my office and the phone rang. This woman said, "I'm from an executive search company," she said. She said, "Well, it's a big job at the BBC." No, you've got the wrong man, because that would be working with my friend Matthew. And if he wanted me, he'd just ring me up.
But it was his friend Matthew, and he did want Trevor. Radio 1 now braced itself for a new wave of sackings. Where Matthew had specialised in DJs, Trevor, nicknamed in the press Dan the Hatchet Man, concentrated on getting rid of behind-the-scenes stuff. And he was also on the lookout for any old-school DJs who'd slipped through Matthew's fingers. Like Bruno Brooks.
A lot of fun, that. In fact, you can buy that in the shops. Actually, it's status quo.
We got to this point where you were thinking, well, why is Bruno on? You know, he seems to have a charmed life, because if the view was we must get rid of the dinosaurs, you know, we've got this behemoth striding the airwaves of dawn. And, you know, I couldn't see much point in keeping him on there. But the audience was really good. He had a big audience of truckers.
Matthew and Trevor agreed that Bruno's days were numbered. But the fatal swing of Trevor's hatchet was to reach much further than the dingy corridors of Egton House. If he was to make Radio 1 feel young again, he knew he had to take on the biggest dinosaurs of them all, the aging rock stars. And where better to start than with Status Quo?
Well, you know how Status Quo records go, don't you? Because they're all the same, pretty much, aren't they? Very nice. I love Status Quo. But if you could point to any either data or instinct that said that people aged 17 were buying Status Quo records, then play the record.
With no evidence of this, Trevor decided that Radio 1 would not play Status Quo records anymore. But where the DJs had run squealing from the carnage of Egton, the monsters of rock sharpened their talons and prepared for a fight.
And they held a press conference where they said that they were going to sue the BBC. They wanted a judicial review of BBC Radio 1's music policy because it wasn't playing their records.
But in a twist of fate, the wrath of Quo was to prove a turning point for Radio 1.
It was fantastic publicity for us. Suddenly, here was something that a good proportion of the target audience could sign up to. They could go, hey, great, it's a station that doesn't play Status Quo.
Now, with Trevor imposing a new music policy that excluded all records recorded before 1990 and anything ever recorded by the Quo, audience figures stopped falling.
We were just beginning to start to get some glimmerings of good PR.
I think Matthew felt, phew, I've got over the crisis, I've got my schedule in place, jobs are good, can sit back and relax.
Steve Wright in the morning.
Thank you.
To Matthew's delight, Trevor's new music policy was proving a hit with young listeners. But DJ Steve Wright was still the vital draw upon whom the entire schedule had been built.
Steve Wright in the morning.
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Clive.
Steve Wright in the morning.
And he was not used to being told what he could and could not play on his own show.
He rang Matthew's office and mine and said, I want to see you both at 4 o'clock in Matthew's office. So, why? I'm not telling you. I suppose I probably thought he was going to come and say, now look here, this, you know, this new music policy and everything, it's obviously not going to affect me, is it?
I called him in and he handed me a letter and said, I'm leaving.
I walked into the office and Matthew was pacing the room, you know, looking kind of very worried, and said that, you know, this is a disaster. This isn't what we wanted to happen at all.
I thought we would be in big trouble. I very rarely see Matthew look worried, but he did look worried that day. I'm not surprised. I mean, it would have, you know, would have worried anybody. That's a big, big blow.
We didn't really leave the office until about 10 o'clock, having had the editor of the Daily Mail screaming down the phone, saying, you know, the front page was going to be worse than bad.
Then questions were asked. And I thought, well, Matthew Bannister, isn't he the chap who lost half of Radio 1's audience, like 9 million people? And then questions started being asked, and it even filtered back to the governors. And they thought, well, maybe this isn't the wunderkind we've all been led to believe. Maybe he doesn't have a King Midas touch.
This was Matthew's darkest hour.
He kind of hit us kind of period of stasis, almost, where these kind of, I'm a bit stuck here, really. Where do I go? What do I do? You know, everything's going wrong.
Frustratingly for Trevor, it also meant a reprieve for Bruno Brooks.
After a long while of Matthew saying, oh yes, he's obviously one of those who's got to go, he would start saying, well, I think we've got to be very careful about this because there's a big audience here and, you know, we might lose a few more percentage points. There was talk of what would happen if the reach went below X percent, you know.
Then, with the station in crisis and the press baying for the head of Matthew Bannister, Trevor was invited to lunch at a pizza restaurant. Here, over a bowl of pasta bows with tomato and basil sauce, the fate of Radio 1 was about to take an unexpected turn. The man on the other side of the table was a good friend of the hottest presenter in British broadcasting, Chris Evans.
We started talking, you know, how's Chris, and because obviously they were very close, and we were just generally chatting. And I told him about the Steve Wright problems, that he was leaving, and well, of course we'd love Chris to do it, but I don't suppose there's any chance of that. And he began to say, do you know, it's not impossible that he might do it. Well, this was a bit of a surprise. And then it suddenly dawned on me, like, oh, clap of thunder, he's actually been sent here to sound us out.
So I went to Chris Evans' flat, just overlooking Tower Bridge. I remember it very well. And he made me a cup of tea. He said, I'm going to do it. And I know I should do it because I'm so excited that when I think about it, I want to go to the toilet. We both went out and sat on a balcony with a paper cup of tea, and this News of the World photographer hid in a bush and took our picture as if he'd surreptitiously come across us, although it had all been arranged.
Now Trevor and Matthew felt they had something to shout about. But Trevor hardly had time to pat Matthew on the back before he learned a terrible truth about the deal his boss had struck with Evans. While previous breakfast shows had always been produced by the BBC, Evans would be produced by his own independent company and would be completely out of Trevor's hands.
So in fact, this was a bit of a blow, because right at the time when I was trying to persuade new people to come and join the department and trying to refresh it and create a new kind of mood of optimism as well as creativity, suddenly the jewel in our crown, which is the breakfast show, is taken away. We were told, well, you don't make that anymore. That was a pretty difficult moment for us, really.
It was a tricky situation to manage because I think that what happened was that Trevor in particular felt bruised by the fact that I'd allowed this show to go to an independent production.
I didn't think that Matthew had fought hard enough to keep him inside the BBC.
Chris said, I will not do it unless it's an independent production. And since I rather needed him to do it, I said, fine, it can be an independent production.
When you're managing a creative talent like Chris, who's always likely to be pushing at the margins, I think it's very dangerous to concede all your authority before you start.
Let's just calm down, I'll leave, huh? Yeah. Just calm down, all right? No, you don't look it, mate. Jesus Christ.
Well, we have been waiting for 4 hours. I know it's not your fault.
It's nothing to do with me, so don't bring that kind of atmosphere and attitude into this happy studio, all right?
He just came on with this optimism and energy and zest. And he just said, don't worry, I'm here now, it's going to be fine.
Yes, it's my show, I'm here now. It's BBC Radio 1, and we're on the air.
He was always fine with me. Opened the door for him once, held the door open for him. He said, hey, Adrian, let me your dibber, open the door.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Audience figures for the breakfast show had started to rise. Now, at last, Matthew felt he could throw caution to the wind, and Bruno Brooks out of the famous side door that Simon Bates had refused to use 2 years earlier. The last of the dinosaurs had gone. By now, even Adrian Just had been forced out of the station he loved.
I was in here on the Friday night getting the Saturday show ready, and we were doing all the topical stuff. And the phone went, and it wasn't Bannister, it was 1, 2, 3, it was a number 4. The number 4 down there said, Adrian, I've got some bad news for you. I said, oh, I know what that is. He said, do you want Matthew to call you back? I said, no, don't bother. I said, I've got a show to get out. I said, just wish him a Merry Christmas and tell him to off, will you?
But as the audiences grew, so too did Chris Evans' ego. And he wasn't going to take any instructions from Trevor Dann.
I think there was always tension between Chris and Trevor, simply because Trevor wasn't in charge of Chris's show.
Where's my BAFTA? Where's the BAFTA?
The problem that we had was that Matthew would say to me, Chris has played a few ridiculous records this morning, go and have a word with him. So I'd go and say, Chris, could you stop playing some of those records? And he would say, no, I'm going to complain to Matthew, because you shouldn't be involved. So then Matthew would call me in and say, go easy on Chris, will you? Because, you know, he's a big talent, we don't want to lose him. And this circle would go round and round. I think I felt that Chris had a bit too much power.
Just a bit too much?
I think he had rather a lot too much, really.
Trevor felt that the one man who could have Chris toe the line was shirking his responsibilities. But Matthew was reluctant to do anything that might upset the man he saw as the station's saviour.
I felt that Chris Evans could break some rules because he was talented, and there were other people who were less talented who shouldn't be breaking rules.
For the first time, cracks were beginning to appear in Trevor and Matthew's 20-year friendship.
My first moment of hesitation was of popping into his office like I always had done, and he was sitting writing, and I said, drink at lunchtime? And he went, oh, yes, have a word with Sarah and book yourself an appointment. I thought, this is going to be a different relationship now. It's been made quite clear to me. The guy I'd first met with the beard and the earring and, you know, hanging out with weird actor-y bohemian types had become this rather kind of stern sort of person. And I found that a difficult thing to get used to.
If he was upset, I'm very sad about it.
By the end of 1996, Matthew's failing relationship with Trevor was not his only problem. Evans had been hitting him with demand after demand, longer holidays and shorter working hours, and Matthew agreed to them. It was even rumoured that Evans had been given unique dispensation to use his personal toaster in BBC premises. More and more people were beginning to think that Evans was out of control.
To call him a monster would not be too much of an exaggeration. I think the success, the adulation, the sycophancy, definitely the sycophancy, all combined and started to push him slightly crazy.
The out-of-control Evans now believed that he alone was responsible for saving Bannister's job and reviving the fortunes of Radio 1. Then, one day, an article in the London Evening Standard gave a small share of the credit for the station's success to Trevor Dann. This was all too much for Evans, who, the following morning, announced live to his millions of listeners how much he deplored Trevor Dann, who deserved no credit at all.
People said, did you hear him? No, I didn't, I said. Oh, he had a real pop at you. And I said, oh, I better get a tape. So I rang the production company and said, could you send me a tape of what Chris said this morning? And they said, no, we've been told not to. I said, you've got to stop him doing this. This is just the latest in an outbreak of completely unnecessary defamations. He sat behind his desk and he got very, very red, and he kept seated, which is very, if you're going to get cross, hey, you stand up, don't you? But he sat down in a very kind of cross sort of way.
I said, that's the way things happen, you know, that's what goes on.
Matthew basically said, well, no, I can't stop him.
And I don't think Trevor was very pleased about that.
Implication being, well, I agree with him. You know, you are, frankly, you are a bit of an arsehole. basically that was it. So I just left.
One of the most powerful and feared partnerships in the history of British broadcasting was over. But in an ironic twist, within days of Trevor's departure, the ginger wedge that had come between them would itself be leaving Egton House for the last time.
My PA brought in a note from his agent which said, unless Chris has tomorrow off and every other Friday off for the rest of his contract, we're going to give you notice to quit.
Enough was enough. Now Matthew stood firm in the face of Evans.
And I said, well, if you need to resolve this issue, then you better exercise your notice clause, because I'm not giving you every Friday off. And he just said, off, and stormed out.
Chris Evans was the 23rd DJ to leave Matthew's Radio 1. Although weekly audiences had fallen by 6 million, Britain's youth was returning to the station, and before long, over half the country's 15 to 24-year-olds would be tuning in. In the eyes of the BBC, this was a big success, and 2 years later, Matthew rose to be director of all radio and television production. Trevor too was given his own department to run, as head of music entertainment. In the last 6 months, however, both men have left the BBC to seek new opportunities. And Radio 1, with its new, younger profile, has moved to new premises, leaving behind Egton House, so well loved by the old DJs.
This about sums it up, doesn't it? It just ripped the heart out of the place. Oh, now this is going to freak me out. 306, there's the ladies living here. And the doors are the same colour. There. 306. Deep breath, guys. It all worked in some strange sort of BBC sort of way, and it's all wrecked now.